Upper Echelon is brought to you by Deloitte. For innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning, turn to Deloitte. Mark Barnes, Executive Chairman of Purple Capital, is in our Upper Echelon this week. Mark, we've known each other for many years, and I can honestly say that you've packed more into your 56 years on this earth than most people do in 2 lifetimes. It's an incredible, I suppose, description to have of a human being, but you really do live life large.
Alex, thank you. Yeah, I do, and I've still got a lot to live. I think we're all going to live much longer than we plan to. And, for most of us, we've still got another 30 or 40 summers on this planet. And I think that the trick is about learning from things and then doing different things all of the time and trying to not reinvent yourself, but trying to, once you've got to peace with who you are, applying that in some new endeavor. I mean, I want to end up teaching, for example. I've learned so much in merchant banking, and I just think that we need to apply those talents to broader endeavor. I think the pursuit of making money has its limitations.
But over the years, you've done a lot of interesting stuff. You've what was that song about? I get knocked down, but I get up again. You must know it off by heart.
Hey, I wrote the thing, man. Look, I mean, someone once said to me, you must learn to make new mistakes. I think there is a correlation between boldness and error. And I think that there's a balance as well. And, the challenge is not whether you'll make mistakes or not. It's what you'll do when you've made them, whether you'll stay. I go to our group at the moment, and we made some mistakes, but we're still all there.
But I think let's just go back to 1996, I think it was, when you left Standard Bank. At the time, it was a head-to-head with Jacko Marie. How different life would have been if you, not Jacko, had been running Standard Bank, or would you have stayed?
No, I would have stayed. And it wasn't head-to-head. He was way ahead of me. But let me say this. I do sometimes think about Standard Bank. I do sometimes think about the different equation. The equation is vastly different in a corporate. You, in some ways, submit a big piece of yourself to become part of a quite protected society. But there's a payoff profile. So if you stay in a big corporate, you're going to have an upper middle income world. You're going to have a house at the sea. Your kids are going to go to private schools. You're going to do all these kinds of things. But there's an element of individuality that you have to submit to the way of the corporate. I'm not saying that's wrong, and there are people that make very good corporate CEOs. But for me, there was a time when that marriage wasn't perfect. When I wanted to go and say my own things and do my own things, and there were some mistakes made and sometimes I miss it. I mean, I sometimes, when I was head of treasury at Standard Bank, my newspapers were practically ironed for me in the morning. And I had the right china teacups and all of those kinds of things. And I learned so much there, and I wouldn't have changed it. I miss the big, what was the Chinese deal like? What was the Nedbank defense like? What were all of those kinds of things like? But I also think it's hard work to do the same thing for that long. I think banking in particular, it's a hard, slow climbing business. And being in that corporate surrounded by the same for that long, I'm not sure I would have thrived in it. I might have been better off financially. I don't know if I would have learned more.
Comfort zones?
Happier.
Out of your comfort zones. Was that a decision you made?
No, it wasn't. I thought I was trading up into more money and less work, but I wasn't. I think that it wasn't about. I don't think there are comfort zones in a big place like that. I think that we were cutting envelopes at the edge, and we were inventing new things, in the treasury and derivative space and all of that. So it wasn't about that. I think I'm actually quite comfortable alone. Rather than as a compliant member of a team.
When did you learn that?
I don't know. I'm still learning it.
But being alone, that you were more comfortable as a lone wolf, perhaps, than a member of a pack.
Well, I think that talking to yourself, which verges on insanity, is something we all do more and more and more. The object of the exercise is no longer to get a distinction for who you are, but to pass. And I have had great joy from being surrounded by people different than me. I get much more out of celebrating the differences in people than celebrating the similarities. And I don't seek to replicate myself. It's boring. I seek to find myself amongst people who think differently, have a different contribution, a different insight. And I mean, that goes right into my personal life. I mean, my only advice for people who have children, and I've got quite a few, is that you should stand behind them, not in front of them. Don't tell them what to do. Ask them what they see. And in that way, you'll find yourself exposed to all kinds of new ways of thinking. And in this world, in this changing technology, management style. I mean, there's a great book that was brought out by a guy called Daniel Kahneman, who's the first non-economist to win the Nobel Prize, called Thinking Fast and Slow, which examines the dynamic between intuition and empirical evidence. And all these kinds of things you don't learn in a protected system. These things you learn when you take your clothes off, And I've enjoyed that. And I've discovered that there are things that I thought motivated me that don't really anymore. I mean, the pursuit of making money per se is about the least most exciting thing I've ever done.
So how do you chair a board meeting, say at Purple Capital?
Well, I think that we do. First of all, we do a lot of preparation in board meetings, and I try and chair board meeting by having everyone say their say. My biggest challenge is, and I read this somewhere, that no one's ever listened themselves out of a job. My biggest challenge is to listen to people. And at board meetings, that is more structurally capable of taking place, because my job is to chair it, not to run it. And so one listens and one's evaluated. I run a board meeting quite tightly. We don't go on for hours. I put limits on time. I limit. I spend my life trying to condense, so people are considering essence. I try and present alternatives rather than photographs of what happened and let people. Analysis is much more important than facts. So I mean, people would, and I chair more than one board in various capacities, and I think people would regard me as having a reasonably fair balance between listening and talking.
And it gets back to what you were saying earlier, not standing in front of your children, not standing in front of perhaps someone who can make a contribution at board level.
Less than a lot of people that are around you. And if you don't give them an opportunity to expose that, you'll never find it out. And if you stand in front of them persuading them of your ways, you create a limit, you create a bottleneck, which might be a superb bottleneck, but it's a limited bottleneck. Whereas if you stand behind and ask what they see and why they see it, and then guide it perhaps or mix it in some way with your own, you'll go further, all of you.
Mark, Purple Capital has been an interesting ride for you.
Yeah.
You've never shirked from a battle, from a fight.
No.
And you are engaged or have been engaged at Purple Capital on a few already.
Yeah.
Perhaps let's start off with the most difficult one, which must have been what happened in London with Global Trader.
Yeah, it was not. It was horrible, man. It was distant. It wasn't our fault. It was someone who defrauded us in a place that we were not at home at. It would never have happened in this country. And I learned an enormous a lot from it. People stole our money, man, and they did it with alacrity. The guy that did it, we still haven't been able to pursue legally in any particular jurisdiction. But I mean, there were some things you learned about there. One is, stay within yourself. I mean, people talk about global expansion every second word. People talk about an African expansion strategy. It's much more difficult than you think, and that's one thing that I must say Standard Bank got right. They took their best team when they went to London, and you have to do that. And so I think we were less considered than we might have been. It was very exciting to go and export ourselves into London and Europe and be big boys, and big boys can fall hard. So we fell hard, and I had to kind of make the decision then what to do about it, and I was determined to stay. The temptation when you have a failure, and I'm not only the CEO or the executive chairman, but I'm the biggest shareholder in Purple Capital, and the decision to stay, as opposed to buying out the minorities and going making the money yourself, was one that I stick by. And in time, and one can't say these things in too much of a forecast sense, but in time, and that time is now, we'll see the benefits of that. So that was a big learning curve, and it was about being distant from something and about being overexcited by bigness. And I actually think that you've got to be as close as you possibly can to the things that you influence, and do them within yourself.
Bond exchange?
Bond exchange is going to prove, we're going to be proven right there. we object. First of all, we saw it as an opportunity. Here you had this big plump thing with, I don't know, 3 times the turnover of the JSE making losses with a net asset value of 125 million, when I think at the time the JSE was like 6 billion. And so the economic turnaround possibilities were just so obvious and so in our face. But we found ourselves in a town, where there were relationships that stretched beyond economics and influence and so on. And so we stood by, and we were told to stand by while a monopoly was created, and we still think that's wrong, and we still think that's going to be changed. Now, I still think there will be alternative exchanges that will emerge here because of a variety of reasons, and we might find ourselves in such a place.
Yeah, would you be prepared, or would you be keen to start an opposition to the JSE?
Hey, watch the space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if anyone's going to do it, Purple Capital, Mark Barnes probably would. I like the approach you're taking on the racing industry, which again is I suppose you could call it it's a duopoly rather than a monopoly. But it did seem strange to many people when you wanted to step in and buy what is a loss-making operation in the Western Cape. Is that just tweaking the tail, or was it?
No. Listen, let me tell you that we think we've learnt an enormous amount about sports betting since the acquisition of VaultBet. VaultBet, which is an online sports trading company. And in that you get exposure to all the different sports. And for us it's self-evident that horse racing is an old-fashioned thing with old-fashioned economics and old-fashioned technology. But it is and can be a central current to an integrated sporting betting strategy. But it requires a move, into a new, management configuration. It requires different economics. It requires participation rather than dominance. And I actually think that that's at the kernel of what we're trying to do. And we're not finished with that game. In fact, we're on the brink of making some very overt moves on that, which I don't want to explore further here. But the bottom line is, why would we buy a loss-making thing? Because it's a loss-making thing. But it's got potential. If you look at the turnover inside that business, and you look at the listed competitor, Phumelela, and you go, well, if we did a relative valuation, you get to quite a big number. And then you go, well, how did that happen? And you start analyzing the things that matter to the industry, and you start looking at, what's the behavior of the stakes, and what's the acquisition cost per bet, and are the participation economics properly dealt between the grooms and the trainers and the buyers, and how does it compare to the international model in Australia, where you've got something that's the same size but it's got 25 times the market cap, and you go. And you start thinking about these things, and you start realizing that maybe the barriers to entry are artificial and the economics could be changed. And when we see something like that, and we came upon it because of the enormous learning curve and the enormous growth that's going to come out of sports betting in South Africa, which is essentially different from gambling in the sense that it's entertainment. You don't go to Loftus. You've signed up with the Blue Bulls now as the in-stadium betting partner. You don't go to Loftus to bet. You go to Loftus to play rugby. But you also have a go, and it's very, very different. And the preserves, which at one time made horse racing the third biggest industry in South Africa, have disappeared. Those barriers are gone. Those exclusivities, those they're gone. And so, and yet it's still a massive place. And so, how could you integrate it? How could you merge online? How could you turn the Turffontein experience into one that people want to go to? And we kind of see some of that stuff. And Charles Savage is a guy who's involved in horses and so on. I don't understand horses, but I understand capital allocation, returns on capital, and changes in economic models, which you have to get to meet the times. And you see this in all industries. The archaic, rules of banking are not going to let them survive. You have to change. This is no different in industry, and we don't intend to be a big takeover play there. We intend to participate and be a relatively small player in what could be an industry-changing combination of sports betting initiatives.
People who think like you think often get terribly frustrated by the status quo. What is it that frustrates you most about what you see around the country here?
Around the country?
Well, in South Africa, in the business environment. Leave politics out of it for now.
Yeah. I think that I said in a piece I wrote the other day that if you were looking for something to do, go and find yourself a company where the CEO is 35 and the clients are double that age. Okay. We've got it the other way around at the moment. We've got the old guys that are still in charge. Now, I'm probably one of the old guys now, but, the frustration is that it takes a long time to persuade entrenched leadership that change can be profitable and virtuous and can have massive unintended positive consequences. And I think that because of the dearth of leadership in this country that we've experienced commercially, for all sorts of reasons in the past, that we find that CEOs stay in the job too long. All of them, with some notable exceptions. And sometimes there's no alternative. But when you get to a situation when you've had the same CEO for 10 and 15 years, and then he goes on to become the non-executive deputy chairman and the what, I mean, where does that invite participation and new thinking? Where does that invite competitiveness? And so I think that we have to have an agenda on the board, which we do, which is, what's new and different, and what are the other people doing? And yes, of course, there's a place for don't fix it if it ain't broke, but there's a place for change it if it would work, And I think that we stuck in it's growing. When we do go overseas and we do expand, and we've done so with great success in many industries. South African breweries is just a phenomenon, but what was it? It was management, it was, and we've got a lot of that here, and we should open ourselves up to the possibility that we can export that, to the possibility that we can involve younger people. I cannot tell you. I've got young children, some of them. And they don't read manuals to understand cell phones or iPads or anything like that. It's intuitive to them. It's for them, it's natural. They pick up an iPad at the age of 6, and they start playing games and pushing buttons. And no one ever tells them that it's a touch screen or this or that. They've got a different set of receptors than we have. And it's a bit like why kids are so good at skiing on the first time, because they've got no fear, they've got a low center of gravity, and they can make mistakes. Well, within some sort of controlled environment, we should all do more of that, because the world is changing very, very fast. And unfortunately, the mistakes are being mitigated by government interventions all over the world. And government interventions are going to create a bubble all of their own. And the debate is no different there, because the tenure of the CEOs of the country, of the rulers of the country, doesn't match the tenure required for the strategy to unroll. And so I just think change is something and this is old stuff, but I think a change is not something that the guys in charge should initiate. They should listen, because there's a lot of new thinking around. And you look at these young guys that comb their hair differently to us and dress strangely, and you listen to what they've seen and how they've transformed that information into ideas and things. And you can learn much more than you can find in the old stuff which we read about.
Mark Barnes, merchant banker, thinker, and the executive chairman of Purple Capital. Upper Echelon was brought to you by Deloitte. For innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning, turn to Deloitte.